The most common mistake that I see in web design nowadays is failure to consider translation and internationalization and the whole customer experience at the outset of the design phase. So people just jump into design way too early and go off and design this great new website. So it's always important to consider translation and the international marketplace before you start creating any new website, and translation should actually be part of the design process. So let's consider, the design itself, right? So from a design aspect, there's a number of areas that you need to think about. There are images, colors that you might be using, the design layout, and the whole usability of the website. So if you look at images just on their own, so are all the images that you plan to use on the site suitable for your international markets, right? Some images are not appropriate in certain regions. So for clocks, for example, in some regions they signify time, in other regions they signify debt. So you need to make that choice, right? And certainly hand gestures are always a no-no, because hand gestures can often differ dramatically from region to region, and they can be very offensive. So certainly don't use hand gestures anywhere in a website or any videos. Color then is also important in the design process to signify meaning or a feeling. So for example, red can mean wealth, such as in China, or it can mean debt. Or danger, should I say, depending on where you live, right? So it's important to consider that, right? In the Middle East, you need to consider that your website, when it's translated, will be from right to left. So if you're looking at the workflow of a website or images, so you might have image A, image B, and image C. But when it comes to the Middle East, you may be looking at it the other way. It might be A, B, and C. So does that workflow work when the screen is flipped around? Because sometimes it can actually cause a confusion to the users, and the whole customer experience is lost, right? Speaking about then usability, the next step then is, if you look at things like, the terms that you use, are there any colloquial terms that you might be using that just don't carry across to other countries? So when you're designing your text, think about how your text is going to be seen in another language. Sometimes funny jokes, it might be funny in English, but it means nothing in other languages, or puns or play on words, for example. If you look at things like payment systems, so for example, here in most of Europe, you would consider Visa and MasterCard as the default cards that everybody uses, right? But that's not always the case in everywhere you go. There are different cards in different countries. So for example, in Denmark, the Dankort card would be the national debit card, so that would be used quite a lot. So you need to consider that in the design in your e-commerce system, whether you're going to include some of these other payment systems. There's also new payment systems coming out all the time. There's Stripe, Revolut. There's also prepaid credit cards, from companies like Prepaid Financial Services and things like that. And you need to consider, are these part of your mix as well in terms of making your customer experience easier and better in different countries? So ask your designers and your marketing team how you're going to implement these, and does the system that you're going to use support all of these, right? So you need to adapt to what works locally in the market that you're going into, so that you get a great customer experience there, right? So now let's look at the technical side of the website. So now you've got all the business side done. So what platform are you going to develop on, right? Are you going to use WordPress or Joomla, Magento, or any of the other systems? There's just so many systems to choose from nowadays, right? But the key question in helping you make a decision is to think about how you're going to translate your content. You need to work out, so when you've built a site, how your text is going to be extracted, translated, and then re-imported back. So how will the translation process work? So for WordPress, for example, will you be using the WPML plugin? Because that WPML plugin is the multilingual plugin that helps translate WordPress. For Joomla, which one will you use? The last time I looked, there were 7 or 8 different plugins for Joomla, and each system will have its own preferred method of translation. So look at this in advance, right? The main thing which does help is to look out for systems that support XLIFF. So XLIFF is the industry standard for file format interchange for translation agencies. So that's how you can send a file to a translation agency, can be translated and can be imported again into your website. It's pretty good format, right? So think about as well the languages that you're going to support in your system as well. So if you're going to, as I mentioned earlier, go into any of the Arabic countries, or you're going to go to Chinese or Korean, make sure that the system that you are about to go down and purchase will support that language as well. So make sure you get all your bases covered up front, right? And just beware of custom web platforms or web systems, right? I've seen people where they've come to us and said, "Oh, I've got this great system that somebody's developed for us on WordPress, and it's really easy to update with all these great widgets in the background, and it's so easy for us to maintain, and that's great in English." But what we've seen is that it's all hard coded into the English system. So while it's great in English, can be absolutely impossible to translate. And I've had a couple of personal experiences of really difficult websites to translate because of custom design, right? So speaking of custom design, then that's that part. Websites also use plugins, right? So you should make a list of all the plugins, or get a list of all the plugins that your designers plan to use, right? And ask if they're all translatables, all translatable, should I say. Plugins can be used for a variety of different tasks. So most websites, for example, would have a contact form, and they're typically put together via a plugin, and most of the plugins will be translatable. But occasionally we do find some that are not translatable. So you need to, again, ask those questions in advance so you know that there's no pitfalls being put into the site for you later on, right? Sometimes if you've got a code that's hardwired into the website, those strings have to be extracted one at a time and then translated, and someone has to put them back into the code. So it's a very expensive exercise for you to do. So watch out for that, right? If you're looking at the SEO of the site then as well, again, plan this, right? So SEO is the next piece, right? Good plugins are available for SEO. So if you're using WordPress, Yoast is probably the most popular one. It's quite good. And there's a couple of other systems that are available as well. So again, plan that as well. So for multilingual SEO, this is the plugin we're going to use, right? When it comes back to images, again, just wind back a little bit. One of the things we also often see is that people have these lovely images and they put text on top of them, you know, for the promotional text. Now, images are incredibly difficult to translate, and they're also very expensive to translate. So the way to produce images with nice text on them is specifically on like homepages and things like that as well, is to use text overlays, and make sure your designers use text overlays. Text overlays work really well. They look brilliant, and they're really easy to translate, and they're great for SEO. So you have everything all in one go, right? And remember, like, all of this that I'm talking about here this has all been done before a single word of translation has even been considered. So we've nothing to do with translation here, but all of the dirty work has been done in advance. So your translation is going to be a lot easier for you to do. So finally, one of the biggest questions we always get asked, right, is about the naming convention of the website, right? So your design agency or your translation agency can certainly help you with this and the process to do it. So let's say, for example, are you going to call your website www.yoursite.com/fr for the French website? Or are you going to call it www.yoursite.fr? So which one are you going to choose, right? There is a newer version out now that you can use with a subdomain called fr.yoursite.com, and that's quite popular now, right? But the decision really is down to you. And the business direction of your website. It's important to get it right at the start, because it's very expensive to change this at a later stage. It's bad for SEO, and it also costs money to do it. So it's best to get it right from the outset. So how do you make the decision? So in simple terms, here's a really easy way of looking at it, right? Yoursite.com/fr would be considered a French translation of the English site. So we're an English site, and here's the French translation of the site, right? If you look at something like yoursite.fr, that will be considered a French website in its own right. So that's a French website in France for France, right? The last one then is fr.yoursite.com, and that's the newer form, and that can actually be considered either a translation or a French website. It's really down to how you actually design your text, and that one's actually okay as well. So the decision, as I said, is really a matter of personal choice and how you want your business to appear to your customers in that country. So again, all about the customer experience, right? And there's many other aspects in the deciding what the best naming convention to use is, but that's a much bigger picture, and we can discuss that in another video. So in summary, right, before you start designing your website, think about the various aspects that impact international users and translation. So what's going to impact the customer experience and what's going to impact the translation process. So consider the choice of the content management system, the plugins you're going to use, any forms you're going to use, look at images, and then look at the SEO and the add-on processes that you will use later on, right? So putting in the effort before you start designing will save you money, and it'll make your site more successful. So translation is going to be cheaper and easier in the end, and it'll work well for your customers. So I'd love to hear any comments you have on your own experiences of website design. So feel free to comment below. And if you really liked this video, please give us a thumbs up as well. We'd really appreciate that as well, because it's always good to see what people think of the videos as well, right? And finally, if you'd like to learn more about websites, translation and SEO, subscribe to our channel below, and we look forward to speaking to you again soon. Cheers, bye.